Now, in England, witch trials were conducted from the 15th century until the 18th century, and they're estimated to have resulted in the deaths of over 500 people. 9% of them were women. And a great deal happened in the Puritan era in the mid-17th century. The first actual law relating to witchcraft in England was not introduced until the reign of Henry VIII, around 1509. Now, there had been trials of suspected witches earlier, like the trial of Eleanor Cobham, Duchess of Gloucester, in 1441. It's a famous example. But it was under James I that the trials started in large numbers. And within 3 years of his acquisition of the throne, James I's new act against witchcraft was put into force. This had been around 1605. And this stirred up fear right across the country. And accusations increased, which created more fear amongst the public, which then meant even more accusations in a vicious cycle. And it seems it was mainly poor, older women who were accused, and especially for cat owners, because they were considered as the familiars. Now, all this madness also created the demand for a new profession to bring suspected witches to justice, the witch hunters. Now, it was Matthew Hopkins who was the most famous of these. He even became known as the Witchfinder General. He received significant payments from towns for bringing to trial all of the witches in the area. And Hopkins was ruthless, ordering the hanging of 19 suspected witches in Chelmsford in one day. Now, his theory for finding a witch focused on locating a devil mark on the suspect's body. Anything from a mole to a flea bite would do. And as proof, he would prick the area with a needle. And if the woman felt no pain, it was said to be proof that she was guilty. But it's thought the device he used was a fake needle that would retract into the handle under pressure. What a piece of work he was, and said to be a godly man. Another early method to tell if someone was guilty of witchcraft, you've probably heard of, was to tie their left thumb to the right toe and toss them in the village pond. If they floated, they were guilty, and if they didn't, they were innocent. These poor women stood no chance once accused. And I would imagine many of the women accused were accused falsely by men with a grudge, or were jealous. Now, the image of witches being burned at the stake, as you see in the movies, is the more popular one. However, hanging is a more common method. Well, it was in England. Famed today for its tart, Bakewell lays claim to being the scene of one of the Derbyshire's very early witchcraft cases, when 2 witches of Bakewell were hung in 1607. The story goes that a certain Mary Stafford from Bakewell, who was a milliner and lived with her sister, who was a widow, and they were struggling, so they needed to take in lodgers to eke out a living. One of her lodgers was a travelling Scotsman, a salesman, but Mrs. Stafford had to evict him for not paying his rent. And as landlords do, they keep whatever they do back as a security for the debt, either to sell on or hope that they'll come and pay what they owe. Now, keeping his belongings may have been a mistake. If she'd thrown out everything belonging to him at the same time, our tale may have had a different ending, and perhaps never been told at all. So we're guessing presumably the fellow gave up any notion of being able to recover his possessions by paying up his dues. And the next we hear of him is that he was discovered dirty and ragged hiding in a cellar in London, and he was brought before the London magistrate on a charge of felonious intent, a person who intends to commit a crime. And he had the most amazing explanation. And the story he told the magistrate was that he'd arrived in London by magic as a result of sorcery. He claimed he'd been asleep in bed in Bakewell when in the early hours he'd been woken by a bright light shining through his bedroom floor. Peering down, he saw his landlady and her sister dressed in outdoor clothes chanting a spell. And he claimed with a blink of an eye they'd disappeared. Whereupon this vagrant, this Scotsman, found himself repeating their chant to himself, and immediately is whisked away himself. Still in his sleeping rags, as well the court could see, he'd been following the women who too had been transported to the same cellar. And he claimed that the two witches had magicked away lengths of fine silk, precious goods from houses beneath, and were parceling up their spoils by lamplight. And when he appeared, it seems that Mrs. Stafford was not at all surprised to see him, and she offered him a drink of wine, which must have been a sleeping draught, because next thing he knew, he was alone. Now, to all except the two women accused, this was clearly a case of witchcraft. Now, the justice in Derbyshire were informed, and the premises in Bakewell were searched, and the man's clothes were indeed found there, exactly as he had said there would be. Now you have to ask yourself, why would an uneducated man, such as presumably this vagrant was, have the imagination to conjure up such a story? Was he on magic mushrooms or something? Or perhaps he'd been ill and the effects of a fever-induced hallucination. Or maybe someone with a vested interest in getting rid of the landlady put him up to it. And as you could guess, his explanation was accepted rather than the women's version. And as a result, the two innocent Bakewell women were executed at Derby, proven beyond doubt to be witches. And this incident was well before the more celebrated Salem witch trials in 1692.